We are back on the spin room. Thanks for staying with us. A few days before the Israeli election took place, the prime minister went on a media blitz trying to get more right-wing voters to vote for his party, the Likud. But some of his remarks caused an uproar. For example, when he was asked by Israeli TV why he hasn't annexed the West Bank, or at least parts of it, which he later clarified to i24's.
Who says that we won't do it? We are on the way and we are discussing it.
I said I would apply Israeli law, or annex, if you will, the Jewish communities, the Israeli communities in Judea, Samaria. That's different. And I want to do it as far as I can with American support.
Well, those remarks made waves also across the pond. 9 Jewish groups, including 5 associated with the reform and conservative movements, wrote to U.S. President Donald Trump asking him to preserve the two-state solution. The letter, which was also signed by 4 U.S. congressmen, says, "We believe that it would lead to greater conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, severely undermine, if not entirely eradicate, the successful security coordination between the State of Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and galvanize efforts such as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that are intended to isolate and delegitimize Israel." Let's break it all down with my guest. Joining me from D.C. is Michael Koplow, Policy Director at the Israel Policy Forum, one of the organizations that signed that letter. And here in studio is our Senior International Affairs Correspondent, Owen Altman. Thanks for coming on the show. Good to see you both. Michael, I want to start with you. Tell us, why did you sign this letter? Why was the Jewish community so up in arms over these statements made by the Prime Minister?
Thank you for having me, Ami. So the reason we signed this letter are for a few reasons, actually. One is our conviction that for Israel to remain Jewish, democratic, and secure, it cannot annex the West Bank or parts of the West Bank because it will put the two-state solution at risk. Another is our conviction that annexation in the West Bank will severely erode Israel's security standing by endangering security cooperation with the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority. And finally, as American Jews, we think it is important for the Israeli government to hear from us and understand that annexation will make it very difficult for those of us who are strong supporters of Israel and who are in the pro-Israel community to keep on advocating for Israel and for Israeli priorities, particularly in the face of things like BDS and the fracturing of support in the Democratic Party. And so for all those reasons, we think that annexation would be a big mistake.
Well, Michael, I think some people maybe on the left side of the Israeli political map are asking, well, what took you so long? Why are you talking about it now? I mean, this is where the Israeli government is basically heading. Israel is becoming more right-wing, and people have been talking about annexation for a few years now already.
I should note that we at Israel Policy Forum have been talking about annexation for a very long time. We launched a campaign called Annexation Watch a few months ago. We have been talking about it. We have been writing op-eds. We have been trying to raise public awareness not only of the prospects of annexation, but of the various costs of annexation. And we have done that in conjunction with our strategic partners in Israel, Mefakdim Leman Bitachon Yisrael. So we've certainly been talking about it for a while, but we think that once Prime Minister Netanyahu came out in the waning days of the campaign and put himself on the record as supporting it, something which he had not done up until that point, we thought at that point it was critical to make our voices heard in a more formal way.
Owen, let's bring you in on this one. How do you see this, and how do you see this letter? Because some of the pundits are calling it a really unprecedented move to write to President Trump, something like that.
I mean, does anything surprise us anymore in Israel-diaspora relations? It may be unprecedented, but I don't think this letter really surprises anybody. And by the way, it may be unprecedented on an issue like this, on a diplomatic issue to take aim at the Israeli government, but not on internal Israeli issues, certainly not on religion and state, but even on other issues. We've even heard the Anti-Defamation League come out over the course of the past number of years in treatment of the Arab sector here in Israel. So it's not so unprecedented necessarily for American Jewish organizations to come out and take aim at Israel, but it may be on diplomatic issues. But again, Ami, given all the water that's gone under the bridge the last few years, can any of us really be surprised that this letter gets put out?
Michael, did you get a reply from the White House?
We have not gotten a reply from the White House. I hope to get one, but we have not yet.
Do you expect, Owen, that the White House will reply to a letter like this? Because seeing how these are, liberal Jewish organizations. I think, we can call it, that's the other side of the map, isn't it?
It seems like the administration, might speak through actions and not words. I don't think they're going to take the time to answer this letter. But of course, doesn't mean it's an unimportant letter for these organizations to send. They have constituencies, certainly the Reform and Conservative movement, people who want to see their movements take a stand in support of Israel, but are also concerned, heartfelt concerns from their point of view on where Israel is headed. So this letter helps those movements strike a balance, I suspect, within their own demographics and their own constituencies. So very, very important for them. As for Netanyahu, why does this not necessarily bother him? Number one, I suspect that he thinks that some of these people are bluffing and that at the end of the day, American Jews, were an annexation to happen, a number of them, at least parts of the American Jewish community, even the left-wing or liberal American Jewish community would, as they have so many times in the past, line up in support of Israel. And again, because of the solidarity of the Israel-diaspora relationship, come to Israel's defense. Also, I suspect that Netanyahu feels that he may not need some of these groups. He can go to those other allies that he's building, whether it be evangelical Christians or right-wing Jewish groups. And number three, I suspect that Netanyahu feels that even weighing the costs and benefits, even if it is costly to him not to have the support of some of these groups, the benefits outweigh the costs. And he sees a real opportunity here, potentially. Again, we'll see if he actually follows through and does this. Saying it in the campaign is one thing, actually doing it might be another. But if he actually does this, he might see this as an opportunity for a short-term gain, even with a long-term cost, just as he did in terms of opposing the Iran nuclear deal in 2015.
Michael, could it be time for liberal Jewish...
I would
go ahead. You can reply. Go ahead, Michael.
Sure. I would note a few things. First is that whether President Trump responds directly to the letter or not, he and his administration have not on the record spoken about their position on annexation. And I think it's notable that last week before a Senate hearing, Secretary Pompeo also refused to go on the record and say whether the Trump administration supports or opposes annexation of the West Bank. So I think whether he responds to the letter or not, it's important for him to go on the record and say what his policy will be.
Michael,
second, I think it's important to note that this letter represents an incredibly broad group of American Jewish organizations representing an incredibly large swath of American Jews. And so while I grant that Prime Minister Netanyahu may not believe that he needs the support of the majority of American Jewry, I think that if a decision is to be made about annexation, he should at least be doing it with his eyes wide open and aware of what the potential impact may be in the U.S.
Right. Michael, could it be time for these Jewish organizations maybe to think of other options than the two-state solution when more and more people here between the river and the sea, both Jews and Arabs on both sides of the map, on the left and on the right, are dropping it? The support for that solution is dropping.
I understand why support for that solution is dropping among Israelis and among Palestinians. But the fact of the matter remains is that if you want to see Israel remain Jewish, democratic, and secure, not only now, but long into the future, the only way to get there is through two states. And certainly at Israel Policy Forum, we are under no illusions about what that will mean and what that process will look like and how long it will take. It's not around the corner, and it's not going to be easy. But ultimately, the two-state solution is the least bad option among a menu of really, really bad options. And I think that it is critical to do anything that we can do as American Jews, as supporters of Israel, and I hope that Israelis would see it the same way, to get to that outcome in a viable way that protects Israel's security. And dropping the idea entirely because it has many obstacles and because it has failed in the past, I think is myopic and will lead to a future for Israel that is going to be less desirable than one that could be had with a two-state solution.
Okay, I want to talk, Owen, about the Washington Post report today that says that the Trump peace plan, the deal of the century, most likely will not include an independent Palestinian state. How do you see this playing out? It looks like this thing might be dead on arrival. If the Palestinians are basically going to say when they hear that, no.
Right, and as I think we said on a show last night, it may not even only be dead on arrival, Ami, it may be dead in transit. It seems to be the case. Listen, I think the point where the Trump administration should be concerned is, according to that Washington Post report, this plan is even dead in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, at a meeting that Jared Kushner held with a crowd that was handpicked, according to the report, by Mohammed bin Salman, who again is seen as being very close to Israel and very close to Kushner and the Trump administration, that even that crowd didn't like this agreement and wasn't ready to go to bat for it. So it really seems possible that the administration will put this on the table, whenever it is they put this on the table, and not even have support from their best friends in the Arab world, let alone the Palestinians. And again, we should say, not necessarily the case that it'll get the support of all parts of this new Israeli government. You could easily see some of these parties, like the United Right-Wing parties, not even being able to support what looks like a very favorable plan for Israel, because again, it will enable, it must enable, one would think, some concessions on Israel's part. So it'll be very, very interesting to see if anybody at the end of the day, Ami, actually really gives full-throated support for this.
You know, I'm wondering, Michael, maybe writing a letter to the Trump administration, you know, wasn't the best idea if they're basically, at least according to the Washington Post, against the two-state solution to begin with. I mean, you guys are talking about restraining Netanyahu, but shouldn't you be trying to restrain the president himself and change his policies?
So, you know, again, important to note that the letter did not ask the president to restrain Netanyahu. It asked the president to clearly state what U.S. positions are so that the next Israeli government will have a clear-headed sense of what American policy is. But in terms of a peace plan, I agree with the assessment that the peace plan is probably dead on arrival, given everything that has been reported and given the position of the Palestinians and given the positions of other Sunni Arab states, and frankly, given the position that Bezalel Smotrich himself voiced just yesterday, where he said he would not sit in a government that is going to engage in any type of peace talks. But my concern, frankly, isn't about the peace plan itself so much. My concern is what happens on the day after it is released, because if a peace plan is released and the Palestinians immediately say no, I think that the reaction among Israelis, and this will be a very understandable reaction, will be to say that's now the fourth time in 2 decades that Palestinians have rejected a peace plan. It's time to move to something new, and the something new is likely going to be annexation. And I think that this peace plan, given the alarmingly low prospects it has for success, may end up being more harmful than any other initiative that has ever been released if it ends up leading to a complete upending of the stability and the status quo that exists right now.
Before we go, Owen, how do you see this Democratic primary affect all this, with a few candidates running already who have been quite critical already of the Prime Minister, of Israel's policies?
Well, I mean, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I don't know whether it's annexation that will be the catalyst for this or some future conflict in Gaza, let's say. But there is no question that the year and a half to go in the American presidential campaign is just going to entrench the partisan nature of the Israel debate in the United States. Again, so many of those Democratic candidates not necessarily coming out against Israel. They're not where Ilhan Omar is, for example, but certainly coming out against the Israeli government. That opinion and that attitude simply becoming entrenched among those who are running for the Democratic presidential
nomination. Are you surprised that it's coming out so early in this campaign, this critique of Israel?
To some degree, but the reality, so many of us have seen this brewing for so long, and I'm sure our guests in Washington would agree. Again, the grassroots support in the Democratic Party for Israel continuing to be on the decline. We've seen that in every poll, every poll over the last 10 years. It was only a matter of time until that would trickle upward, and a presidential campaign is a great opportunity for that to trickle upward, because it's 30 candidates in this case, all vying for support among slices of that base. It's different than Washington, when a lot of those Democratic candidates are in safe seats. So again, we're going to see it in 2020. Not good news for Israel.
Owen Altman, thank you very much. Michael Koplow in D.C., thank you much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. That's it. Hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks for taking a ride with us on the Spin Room. Hope you hop on again every Monday and Thursday, 4 p.m. New York, 11 p.m. in Tel Aviv. In the meantime, hang in there.